Alrighty, good morning, folks. I hope you all are doing well today. My name is Brian Schuster. I've been developing for the FWEB3 community now for a couple of weeks since the experiment started, and I've seen a lot of questions and a lot of interaction from folks here. It's clear that a lot of the folks starting in this community are very new to blockchain. They want to understand how all of this actually works. So what I've decided to do, and we're experimenting today to see if this will be helpful, is I wanted to do kind of a quick education session. I saw some questions in the thread that I wanted to go answer. I'm planning on doing this maybe for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, just to start answering some basic questions. And hopefully this will help people in the community to understand how, blockchain actually works. So even though this is for FWEB3, I'm not really going to be talking about, our token specifically, but more about the basics of blockchain. So without further ado, here are the topics we are going to be discussing today. So we're going to talk a little bit first about what is actually a blockchain and what's really going on. And the thing is that I don't think we cover blockchain very well as a community. There's a key distinction between how it works and how to use it. And I want to kind of make that clear for our community today. So I'm going to go into a little bit about what is a blockchain. I want to go into a little bit about what a wallet actually is and whether or not you actually, what's really going on when you generate a wallet, where are the private key, what is a private key, where are the tokens actually held, and go a little bit more into that. I did see a couple of user questions that I wanted to answer. So one, I'm going to go into what is staking and how exactly does that work. Again, with a focus on you being an end user and somebody who is interested in using this technology as opposed to somebody who really needs to understand it at a technical level. So I'm going to go into, enough detail for you to be knowledgeable in that area. And then finally, how to get started into Web3. And I'll give you some books and a personal story about how I got involved with it. So first, let's talk about what is a blockchain. So if you ask most people in this industry what a blockchain is, you're not going to get really useful answers because when somebody hears what is a blockchain and how does it work, what they're hearing is how can you prove that this thing you're talking about actually does what it does. So like, for example, imagine if you dealt with somebody who has never seen a computer before and what they've done. Like imagine you've sent them an iPhone and these is just somebody who's just never used a smartphone. And you're handing this. There's two questions that they can be answered. They may ask, how do I use this thing? And then how does it accomplish those set of tasks? Like to use the phone, all I'd have to do is, you swipe up, you press a button, you press an app, and it gives you a whole bunch of, data and information. But then as they're using this, they might go and say, well, how the heck can it do all of these things, what it is? And in order to do that, you got to explain how does the circuitry work? How does Wi-Fi work? How does all these things do? And you get really, really into detail about what the actual iPhone is and how networks work and really complicated. If you're interested in that, you need to get much, much deeper. But if you're interested in just using the damn thing, you need to know way, way less. And so your mental model doesn't have to be as thick. So because of that, I want you to forget a lot of what you know about blockchain, at least temporarily, at least for now. Don't worry about decentralization because it doesn't really matter for your purposes. Don't worry about cryptography for the most part. We need to get into it a little bit for a wallet to do that, but don't worry about this. Don't worry about the double spending problem because it's not really useful for how you're going to use this. But instead, I'm going to have you think about a blockchain like this. So if you're a user, what do you need to know about this thing, assuming that everything I say is correct? First off, a blockchain is just a permanent record of how assets move from person to person or entity to entity. So all this is really just saying, hey, I'm Brian, want to send you tokens, so I'm going to send you a bundle of tokens out there. All a blockchain is just a ledger that sits out there in the world that is just a permanent record of money moving back and forth. Not too much different from an accounting record, really, at the end of the day. The ledger that everyone looks at is exactly the same. So if we are on the blockchain network, it's not like you're going to have a copy of the ledger that's different than my copy of the ledger. It's going to be exactly the same thing. So I know if I send out a transaction and it actually goes through and I get confirmation of that, it's going to be the exact same person, exact same ledger for everyone. And in addition, I can be certain that if I send you tokens, if a certain address sends you tokens, the only person or individual that sent those tokens is going to be me. So for example, if I work for, if let's say we had a paper ledger, for example, between the two of us, right? And basically you have assets and I have assets, and I go to that ledger and say, oh, I'm going to take a pencil and I'm going to write in, hey, I'm sending you 20 tokens. Now you have this. If we both leave and come back and all of a sudden we see the record change, that now it said 40 tokens, not 20 tokens, we can't be certain if I changed it, you changed it, or somebody else. But with a blockchain, because of the way that it's set up, we know the only person who sent those tokens could have possibly been me. And once you send them to somebody else, we know the only person who could send your tokens is somebody who is you, or the person who has your private keys, who has access to your wallet. You can think of it that way. The person who has access to your wallet, which is assumed to be you, is the person who moved that. So that's the next thing you understand about blockchain. Blockchains are permissionless, so anyone can participate. So that's another key feature about the way this works. You don't need to ask anyone to sign up for the Bitcoin network. You don't need to go and get anyone onto Polygon. Anyone can go and use this thing. You don't have to ask anyone. So if I go and create an address and send tokens for myself, there's nothing I have to do other than just transact on the network to be able to do that. So that's another really important feature about the blockchain. You don't have to ask anyone to go and participate in the network. You can just go and do it. Users pay a cost of using the blockchain in order to be able to use it and in the native currency. So when I go and basically deal with a bank, for example, right? There's a certain fee associated to it, and you have all these hidden fees, and you have these free transactions and all these things. It costs money, but you're not really sure who's going to pay for it. We know that blockchains, the user pays the fee. So for example, when Sahil sent out all those FWEB3 tokens, he wanted to interact with this network. So he was the one who had to pay the fee to be able to use that. If you want to be able to use this network, you're going to have to go and pay a fee. And you're going to be paying it in the native currency of that network. So for example, if I'm on the Ethereum network, I pay in Ethereum to be able to go and use it. So I need amount Ethereum to go and pay. If I want to use the Polygon network, I have to use a small amount of Matic, their native currency, in order to be able to use it. And that's what gives everyone the incentive to basically support this network, that they're going to make a certain fee to be able to go and use it. That's why people participate. And then finally, the last thing you need to know is blockchains are global ledgers and don't have any boundaries. So not only are they permissionless, anyone in the world can go and use these things. So I can go and be in Belgium and send tokens to somebody who lives in, Peru. And then that person in Peru can split that and send that to his friend in Brooklyn and his friend in Japan to go and do that. And so that's really the basis. So when I sat down and thought, what's really useful, if you understand these concepts about the blockchain, you understand enough to be able to get going and know these things. Oh, it's a permanent record. Only people who send this are the same. It's permissionless, all these things here. Now, how they accomplish that is much, much more complicated. I'm going to get into one of those subjects today related to wallets, but for our purposes today, you don't really need to dive into those things. If you take those things as true, it's very easy to interact. If to yourself you have to go and prove, well, how do I know it's permissionless? How do I know it's a permanent record? How do I know that somebody can't do that? You have to get a lot more complicated. So that's really the blockchain. Here's really what's happening with the wallet. I wanted to find a simpler way to explain this, but honestly, I think this is the easiest way. So when you interact with the blockchain, the reason it's permissionless is because what ends up creating an account on the blockchain is just something that's generated by math. So for example, if I go and create a private key, for example, here, we're seeing that, I have some random number, and it truly is a random number. It can be anything. You can go and decide to generate a private key from a entry in a book. You could go into the Bible, pick your favorite Bible verse, and use that as your private key, basically, or use that as your seed phrase, which then generates a private key, which then generates all these other things. You never really see this. When you go and generate a wallet for the first time, MetaMask will generate it for you automatically and kick it back, and there's really important reasons for it to go and do that. But what ends up happening is that private key goes through this mathematical equation, which basically goes and generates a public key. The math behind this is ludicrously complicated. Ludicrously complicated. It's really good to know, but it's one of those things where if you want to understand cryptography, you can understand surface level, but all you need to know is that basically that private key is the only thing that can generate that public key. And you can prove that you own that private key by signing signatures. So effectively, this thing here is the thing that proves you own this you own this wallet. That goes through some math to generate this public key. Then Ethereum applies one more algorithm on top of it to generate this phrase, and then this ends up being your Ethereum wallet. The reason anyone can interact is because anyone can generate a wallet. Anyone can go through and generate some random set of numbers to go through, and as long as you go through this math, and again, this math is well known. If you had a calculator, whatever, let's say you had no computers or anything, whatever, and you just had access to a node, and you did that, you could do this by hand. And I would encourage you, there's a video about the Bitcoin network about somebody literally going through the math and doing the bitwise translation to take a private key to turn it into a public key. It takes a really, really long time, but you can go ahead and do it. And you can sign transactions and do everything you need. So this is kind of the really important thing to understand. Your wallet doesn't actually hold anything. Like here, for example, I have my actual physical wallet here, right? And this is an important concept to understand. I go in, I have things like my credit card in here. I have things like my ID. I have dollars. I have money. And when you think of wallet, you particularly think of, dollars. I have no dollars in here because I spent all my money on cryptocurrency. But in theory, somebody else has a lot of dollars in here. So when I say wallet, you think that your wallet actually has access to those things, or it has those things physically there. Like you actually have FWEB3 like actually in your Ledger wallet. No, you do not have that. What you have is this super secret private key that then generates this address, and that address has an entry onto the ledger that says this public key has those things. So what that ends up meaning is that that private key is as good as me having dollars in this wallet. It is as good as that, but it's not quite what ends up happening here. All it is just being able to go and generate an account for you to go and be able to deal with assets. And so what ends up happening is you have this asset, you have this address, and then somebody can go on to the Ethereum chain, and this is this is the Polygon, this is on the test network, and they can take a look at all the transactions that happened. You can say, oh, this wallet received some test transactions, it sent some money to some wallet. You can see I used the faucet transaction a number of times, that's for testing the FWEB3 Matic wallet. And you see all these transactions there, and all of a sudden you can go and check and see what this person ends up owning. If you own that private key, you own this address, is the way you do that. Which means if somebody gets access to that private key, and this is where the wallet paradigm breaks down, they too own it. So if you both have that private key, you both have that wallet. Which means if they move those tokens out and move it into a wallet that only they have the private key, it's now theirs. That's how people lose money in this industry. People lose access to their private keys, they lose access to their MetaMask, and they end up move them elsewhere. So security is a totally another different discussion, how to stay safe in this industry. But really, all you need to know is your MetaMask or your wallet has a private key that generates this address that then owns all these transactions. And if you own the private key, you own the wallet. Or you own the tokens that are within that wallet and all the assets that are there. So really important to understand. So those are the basics. I hope this helps you understand. Now I want to get into two additional subjects that were asked about for people. So the first one is, what is staking? So there's a number of ways that you can generate basically interest for your tokens in your assets. You think about it. If you go to a bank and you go and invest in a bond, you get a certain number of tokens. You get a certain interest rate back for putting your money up into the bond because you're taking a risk, you're getting paid for that money. If I go and I go to a loan shark and they loan me $10,000 to basically go bet, they may charge me 50%, right? Something ludicrous to basically go into it. That's interest paid to me. If I go to, the bank and get a small business loan, I'm going to have to pay them back the loan plus a certain amount of interest. Well, the cryptocurrency has something similar, where there are these certain activities you can do that pay you interest effectively for going and loaning out your cryptocurrency. One of those activities is known as staking. So what staking is, it's how blockchains maintain decentralization of assets for proof of stake networks. So you may have heard of proof of work networks, and those are starting to go away because they're very, very environmentally, they're very power intensive, they're very environmentally unfriendly compared to staking. I personally don't believe that it's as big of a deal as people are making, because I can't remember the last time somebody ever went to Google and asked them, hey, how much energy are you using on YouTube to send out cat videos or TikTok or anything else? I don't know why Bitcoin is held to the standard, but no one else is. But I can get on my soapbox another time. However, it is definitely more environmentally impactful than staking. So one of the core concepts behind these networks in order to be able to secure them is that they need to maintain decentralization. If one person ended up owning like 90, over 51% of, all the stakers in a particular network, it means that they can manipulate the network and that they can basically cheat on the blockchain. For example, they can manipulate the currency, they can send money to different places. That's not what you want to do. So decentralization is how you maintain security, and proof of stake is just one way to be able to do that. So what ends up happening in proof of stake networks, and again, this will vary based on the network you're on, but I'll do a simple one. Let's say they decided, okay, our network is going to have 100 validators. You can have more people behind that, basically, that also have stake, but you're going to decide that the top 100, staked validators are the ones that actually matter. These are the ones that have the right, basically, to go validate transactions, send them out, sign them to do that, to make that happen. And because they're validators, they end up making a fee, basically, to go and validate transactions. So when you go and send a transaction, it does the math behind the scenes to make sure, oh, this token's actually owned by this individual, and these transactions are there, make sure it happen. All they have to do is run the software from the validator. So it's not like they're physically doing work, but they have they have they have to keep a server up and running. They have to go and make sure it's actually out there. So these 100 validators go through. But again, it could be, but there needs to be a cost to run a validator. Again, if 51% of the network ends up being owned by one person, they can manipulate it. So how do you make sure you have a bunch of different validators? Well, what you say is that in order to be a validator, you have to lock in a certain number of tokens on the network to own that network. And so what you're saying is that you need to have 1,000 Ethereum minimum to be considered a validator. And again, this can be millions and millions of dollars that you have to stake in to be able to run a validator. So I put up a node, I have to stake a certain amount of money, and I have to lock it in the network to go and say, okay, I have locked these tokens into the network now. I get the chance to be a validator. So, you take a look at this list and it goes from top to bottom. Here's the top validator with the most tokens, your validator number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way down to 100. And that's your group there. And now these guys get the chance to basically own fees on the network. They get money to be paid, and they get a certain amount of interest on their tokens, basically, that if they have 1,000 tokens, they end up making like 10% of years. So every year they make 100 Ethereum back, as an example. So that sounds great, but what's the downside? The downside is that if the validator goes offline, or it double signs, which is another thing that can happen there, where it signs the same transactions twice and both are on there, or they're found cheating, where they're running software that they shouldn't be running because they're trying to lie and get an advantage. To do that, they'll get what's called a slashing condition. What a slashing condition says is that basically it says you've been found to be cheating, so now that 1,000 tokens they had to stake, you now lose part of that token stake. So minor infractions might lose like 1%. So now instead of having 1,000 tokens, you only have 990 tokens that are locked in the network. So you lose 990, or you lose 10. But for big ones, like really, really bad things, like if you go offline for more than, an hour or something like that, or you lose, you found to be, cheating, you could lose like 50% of your tokens. Remember, we're talking millions and millions of dollars. And so what ends up happening is that you're creating a financial incentive for the validators to remain online, to play by the rules and to just run the protocol the network did. All you have to do is run the protocol, make sure your network is up, and make sure you're checking there. And so this creates a financial incentive not to cheat. If you don't cheat, you're going to make 10% of that stake year over year. If you do cheat, you could lose all of it, and there's nothing you can do about that because the network it's locked in the network. They decide what to do. So there's a corollary concept to this called delegating. So like if you are a validator, you create a validator node, you stake, and you put your tokens in there. But other people can delegate to you to basically say, I want this person to validate on my behalf. So for example, Brian might have 100 tokens and say, hey, I trust this individual to basically go on my behalf. So I'm going to delegate my tokens to this individual. So he has 1,000, Brian has 100. So now they have 1,100. Now the good news is I get to take advantage of that staking fee. So even though I'm not running a validator, I get to stake on the network as well. And my 100 tokens gets, staking fees as well. What the validator gets is that they get to charge me a fee basically for the right for me to delegate to them. So you might see on like Osmosis network, for example, that they say, or like, on the Atom network, which is one place I stake, that says, okay, if you stake with me, I'm going to charge you a 5% fee. So for every $100 that comes in, I'm going to take $5 of your money, give it to myself as a fee for running the validator. You get 95% of it, and they can raise and lower that fee, for staking purposes. To do that, the downside, so the upside is I don't actually have to run my own validator anymore. I can trust somebody else. The downside is if they fuck up and they lose my money and they do a slashing condition, I lose my money too. So there is a risk to actually going to do it. It's not just free money. You actually have to watch your validators, know that they're out there, and make sure that they're not losing, that they're playing by the rules. But assuming that you go and do that, you could actually make decent money as well. And that's just one of the ways you can make money in the in this industry. So that's staking. There's one other question I wanted to answer here, which is really how you get into Web3. And so honestly, because I know people here are trying to get in. I know this is a massive industry. There's so much going on. Even people who are like in this industry 100% of the time can't keep up with everything that's going on. I mean, there's just too many networks. There's too much going on. So it's really hard and difficult. And particularly when you get that fear of missing out, it's just awful. So here's what I recommend for folks. The best way to get started is really to buy and sell assets and figure out what's actually going on. And I'll go into a story about how I actually got into Web3. So in 2016, it was January of 2016, and honestly, I was actually not even interested in cryptocurrency that much. I know there was stuff out there, but I really wasn't super into it. But I decided, I'm going to invest. I'm going to go in, and I don't like stocks. I'm not interested in stocks. They bore me. But cryptocurrency kind of looks like the stock market and kind of has a lot of stuff going on. So I'm going to teach myself how to invest, but I'm going to use cryptocurrency as the medium. Because at that point, the market was small. There really wasn't that much value tied into these different networks. So it seemed like it was relatively safe. I saw Ethereum and I thought, I get what Ethereum's doing. It's kind of creating a network. It's kind of like an operating system. I get that. So I started to invest. And then, I think over the course of the next few weeks, I invested, something small every week. $50, $100, just to keep it up and do that. But I had to use different exchanges to go and get my tokens. I had to go from Coinbase, which at that point, Coinbase didn't even allow you to buy Ethereum, I don't think. I had to go to buy Bitcoin from Coinbase and then go and exchange in Poloniex, I think it was, that exchange a long time ago, and go and get those tokens, to get those tokens. And as I started playing, I started watching the price and it would jump and go down, and I would see these other tokens here. And by actually buying and holding these tokens, I kind of went, what the hell is actually going on here? What am I doing with what's going on? And so I spent the rest of 2016 really sitting and learning about, well, at the time I called it blockchain or cryptocurrency. We now kind of call it Web3. I think that's a better name. And I ended up reading a bunch of books and a bunch of, papers on this to really get an understanding of what was going on. And so the catalyst for all of that was buying assets. I mean, that's really what this is. Blockchain at the end of the day is just really a ledger for financial assets. It's financial software. That's the way you really need to be thinking about this stuff. It's not this magic JPEG machine. It's not this meme generator. It's really just boring old asset translate. It's just boring old ledger software. Really, really good ledger software. It's got some special properties, but you're just transacting back and forth. So, with people, and you're just, changing records in a ledger. So by buying and selling and buying NFTs and getting involved, that activates enough of your brain that you have to put in energy, by the way. These aren't trivial. Like getting MetaMask to hook up is not a trivial task. It actually takes some time. So really, I credit me buying tokens very early on and seeing what actually happens to them afterwards to spark my interest. I then read a bunch of books that really helped me understand both the underlying principles of decentralization and blockchain. And I actually have 3 books that I recommend. One of them is The Starfish and the Spider by Ori Brofman, which I read years ago before I even knew what Bitcoin was. But that really, I credit the understanding that for why decentralization in Bitcoin mattered. If I didn't understand decentralization, I don't think what Bitcoin was doing would have mattered to me as much. Once I understood what decentralization was doing, then that got me into, okay, I get what's going on here, and it kind of allowed me to go and study. I studied the Bitcoin white paper, which really helps explain why does this stuff matter and what you do there. So all the nerd shit about how this works, the Bitcoin paper will do that for you. And then finally, I read The Internet of Money by Andreas, and he was just, that really changed my mindset. He has 3 volumes of this book now, which is a bunch of talks that he's done on Bitcoin in that area. And honestly, I read those, and it was just, totally opened up the world. So after that, I got into the technical details, and that slowly marched my way into being able to help a lot more people here and talk about this and get into subjects. So if you want to get into Web3 without getting into the technical details of how to develop with it, because again, the development is really important, but you can understand how to develop for it, but if you don't understand these underlying principles, it's not going to matter. Understanding this is kind of a gateway into getting why the development actually matters, and then understanding why you need to do that. So that's what I would recommend. So anywho, folks, that's about 30 minutes or so. So I appreciate you giving me your time this morning. If you have any questions, thoughts, comments, please let me know. Again, I'm trying to improve in this area as well. So if you think there's something I can do better or something you want to hear about, I'd be totally happy to basically make amends and try this again later. So anywho, thank you very much, folks.